Welcome everybody. We're here for the shared learning event on place-based local development plan evidence reporting. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Heather Claridge. I'm a director at Architecture and Design Scotland. I'm also chair of the Key Agencies group. So for today's event, where we're sharing some initial learning coming out of the pilot work, we've partnered up with Heads of Planning Scotland and the Improvement Service. So I'll be chairing the session today, but I want to briefly hand over to Gordon Lang, well known to many of you, I'm sure, in the audience as the chair of HOP's Development Planning Committee, to welcome us. So Gordon, do you want to do a wee welcome here?
Thanks, Heather, and thanks for the introduction. And I'll change my script around, and I said before I go any further, thanks to ANDS and David Mitchell in particular and his organising team for putting all the effort into getting this event pulled together. And also thanks to all the participants from the local authorities and the key agencies who've agreed to come along today and participate in the event and the amount of time they put into preparation. So Heather had said this event is about shared learning on place-based local development planning and evidence reporting. And the aim of the event is to explore the experience of the key agencies and local authorities who are part of the collaborative local development plan offer, that pilot, of which Heather will explain more. Many put out a call and few were chosen, if people get that reference. And we're going to hear from some of those who were chosen today. The session's going to give us a real insight into the process that was followed with broadly and with each of the authorities, the expectations that all the partners came in with, the challenges that they faced as they've gone through the various different stages of the process, and each of them are at slightly different stages of the process, and the benefits that they've realised and the things that they've learned that they can apply as they work in this way. And through sharing that with us, hopefully each of us, I fully expect each of us will pick up something that we can utilise out of that shared experience as we move towards our evidence reports, which we all are on that journey. I think there's a wide range of colleagues here today. It's not just planners. There's the key agencies, there's economic developers, there's others, people will correct me. Heather's now going to take you through an overview of the agenda. And then we'll move into, I think, a quick icebreaker Menti question. But again, thanks for everyone for coming along. You will get a lot out of this. I fully expect you will. There's a great agenda, really good speakers, some really good learning to be achieved through this. And I'll now hand over to Heather to take us through the details of what's in store for the rest of the afternoon.
Brilliant, thanks Gordon. Really appreciate that welcome, and also coming from HOPs there, so that's great. So as I mentioned, we've got a lot of ground to cover, so if we go to next slide, gives just a flavour of what we're going to do in terms of the kind of running order. So we're going to do a bit of scene setting to begin with. I'll then bring in our panellists, who I'll introduce properly in a few minutes. I'm going to ask them to share their experiences of taking a collaborative approach. We're also going to collect your insight and questions along the way. As Gordon mentioned, we'll be doing this in two ways. Firstly, we'll be using Menti, which I'll get Trevor to explain a bit more about how we use in a minute, but we'll also be using the Q&A function. So just to be clear, not the chat function, if you keep that for any technical issues or questions that you have, but if you can put any questions in the Q&A function, we'll be monitoring that, and we've got a bit of time at the end to go through as many as we can get through within the time period for that. And we aim to finish up around about 4 o'clock. So as I said, a lot of ground to cover, quite packed, so we'll just get going. So the first one we want to do, as Gordon suggested, we're going to do a bit of an icebreaker and get us all used to using the Menti platform. Here's the instructions. So I'll pass over to Trevor, who's a Menti whiz, to explain how we get onto it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Trevor Moffat from the Improvement Service. I'm sure many of you have used Menti boards before, but if you've not, it's fairly straightforward. Firstly, if you want to use your phone, just scan the QR code that's appearing on the screen just now. And if you'd rather use your computer browser, if you just go into the chat, I will just put the link to the to the Menti website and the code in there. So you can join either way. I can see a good number of people. I think there's 40 odd people already in the room. So I'll leave this up for a second or two longer, and then pass back to Heather to take you through the first question. But it looks like it's working for everyone. So yeah, if you have any issues with it, just put something in the chat and I'll try and fix it for you as well.
Great, thanks Trevor. And we'll just give people a minute to get on to Menti. And also keep that handy. So if you're on a web page or if you've got it on your phone, keep it handy because we'll be using it throughout today's session. So hopefully all of you have got on, and we flick over to the next slide, which we want to ask you, what's your experience of working in a place-based collaborative way on local development plans? So I see a few coming in already. Great. So not quite 50-50, a sort of 60-40 split here. Great, I think last few numbers coming in there. So yeah, so as we said, we've got quite a lot of people in the audience. You can see from the numbers that are coming up here, but a kind of good split in terms of, you know, those of you who are working in that way and those of you who aren't. That was a bit of an icebreaker question for us, but it's also helpful for us to gauge, you know, that there are those of you who are really experienced about this in the audience, but those who are maybe coming at it quite kind of fresh to that. So that's great. Brilliant. So as I said, keep Menti handy because we'll be using it throughout the session. So now we want to kind of move on and almost introduce what we're going to talk about. So to set the scene and explain more about the work that we've been developing as Key Agencies Group, I've asked Catherine Lakeman from SEPA, who's our lead for the placemaking group, to speak a bit more about that kind of need for a different approach by Key Agencies Group. So hi Catherine, nice to see you. Do you want to give us a bit of insight?
Yeah, thanks Heather, and good afternoon everybody. Yes, as Heather said, I'm Catherine Lakeman. I work at SEPA, and I chair the Key Agency Placemaking subgroup, which was kind of instigated this project, if you like, and has general oversight of it. You can see from the slide that we're quite a broad church of 11 agencies involved with this project. Collectively, we bring a really wide variety of different skill sets, knowledge and evidence to help the understanding of and potential opportunities for our places of the future. And over the past 4 or 5 years, we've found real added value through working together as a team of agencies with our partners. And this team approach really brings many benefits, not least the upstream tackling of often complex and interrelated issues, and often helping to turn these into opportunities where that's possible. And really importantly, you know, it really helps improve the resource efficiency in the longer term through early consensus building and ultimately improved outcomes for our places and their communities. So can we go to the next slide, please? So yeah, as you'll no doubt be aware, MPF4 establishes a real step change in the ambitions for land use planning in Scotland, and really challenges how we need to work moving forwards if we are to successfully address the significant challenges facing our places. So the Scottish Government's supporting guidance for the really important role of local development plans identifies that to achieve this, we must work in ways that are place-based, people-focused and deliverable. And this starts with the first stage of the process, the evidence gathering, and this is where we're very much focusing our efforts at the moment. It requires a truly collaborative approach where we can develop a shared understanding of our places and all buy into a shared ambition for their future. And next slide, please. As I've previously alluded to, the policy context in MPF4 recognises a need for radical change to meet the challenges ahead. This includes a recognition of the need for a much stronger collaborative approach across all stakeholders in line with the place principle. The implications for local development plans are significant, and the Scottish Government's guidance makes it clear that they should be prepared in quite a different way. They should be, they'll look very different. They're going to be much more a series of place briefs, be much more visual, and they'll have much less policy wording. And also they are going to be used differently to support delivery. The key agencies recognise that this can present a real challenge for the planning authorities, and we're keen to position ourselves to build upon our previous learning of taking a more collaborative place-based approach to support this way of working. So as a result of all of this, we've launched the offer of piloting this approach with some planning authorities early last year. And I'll now hand over to Heather, who will talk about this in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Catherine. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, so as Catherine said, the need for us to work in a collaborative way, not just in terms of key agencies, but also with local authorities. So we developed an offer, identified that actually we could really help upstream in terms of the evidence report kind of working. So we launched an offer probably about this time, maybe last year, which we got a great response back from 22 planning authorities interested in finding out a bit more and working with us in this collaborative way. As Gordon hinted at, we weren't able to work with everybody, even though we would have wanted to work with everybody. So we selected 6 who I'll introduce in a little bit. But if we flick on to the next slide, which it shows, so the work that we're doing with the 6 authorities is based around these different steps, which was established in some early work that was done with Fife Council, who remain as one of the pilots for our work. And it's really taking that step-by-step approach to really build up a collaborative approach, so not just planning teams kind of working together, working across services and with other stakeholders and key agencies as part of that. And also to really think about a place-based approach. So you'll see here, and what we'll do today in this afternoon session is just talk you through a bit more about the different steps involved in that, and what's been some of the benefits and challenges of taking this approach. So I won't say too much more, because I know we'll get to different points where we'll introduce the details a bit more. But if we flick on to the next slide. So as I said, we chose to work with 6 authorities in quite an intensive way to get some really good learning out of it. So obviously today is a chance for us to share some of that early learning out of it. But I'm really pleased to be joined by 4 of the 6 authorities, and you can see from the logos of the different authorities here, they're all at different stages. So today I'm joined from Highland Council, we have David Cowie. From Comhairle and Eilean Siar, we have Mary McIver. From Midlothian, we have Grant Ballantyne, and from Fife Council, we're joined by Dominic Minnie. So welcome to you all, thanks very much, and we'll come on to questions in a little bit. And we also have from the key agencies group to give their insight. Obviously we have Catherine here, who's already introduced herself. We have Andrew Stevenson from HES. We have Navid Forenton from Public Health Scotland, and we have Debbie Livingstone from Transport Scotland. So again, thank you very much for offering to join us on the panel. So I think at the moment we maybe can put down the slides and maybe get a chance to see all our panelists in a bit more detail. Thanks, Trevor. Hi, everyone. So I'm really pleased you can join us today. So I want to start our discussion with a kind of a question, and I'm kind of curious to understand more about your initial interest in the offer and what you were looking to get out of it when you put in a kind of submission. What were you looking to get out of that joint working? So I'm going to go to a few of the authorities. So maybe I'll start with Dominic from Fife. How about yourself?
Hi. As you mentioned, we did some pilot work with you on our evidence report prior to the offer being made, and we wanted to do that because for us preparing a new LDP was a priority. Our existing Fife plan was at the time was approaching its 5-year mark, and we were holding off to start work on the new system. And because it's a brand new process with a focus on data and evidence gathering and place-based plans and collaborative working, we felt it needed a different approach, and we hope that the offer would bring ourselves and the key agencies and other 5 council teams together to develop a shared understanding of the issues that we need our new LDP to address, and as well as give us some new ideas along the way. And as we've been doing that pilot work with you, we were very keen. It was very, very beneficial. So if we want to talk about it talk about later on, we found it very, very beneficial, and we were very keen to carry on with that work. In terms of we've progressed our evidence report a fair way now. It went to cabinet this morning. But we're thinking, what are the next steps? Where does it go on? How will this approach influence how we prepare our LDP going forward?
Great, thanks, Dominic. And Grant, how about yourself in terms of Midlothian? What was your sort of interest in the offer, and what did you find from getting out of it?
Thank you, Heather, and hello, everyone. Very similar to Dominic, really, actually. We knew in 2023 we would be starting the review of our current adopted local development plan, and we thought it would be an opportunity to help us get across the place concept to being at the heart of the plan. And we felt it would be helped to facilitate bringing people together and helping also to raise the profile within the local authority, the role, the status, and the content of a local development plan. And so we thought that with getting the support of the key agencies to help get that message across would really help us going forward in the plan creation. So that, and what Dominic was saying, was really our interest in the process. And just reiterate what Dominic was saying, that it's been very useful for us and beneficial to us, and I'm grateful that we did apply and were chosen. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Grant. And David, how about yourself in terms of Highland?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm David Carey from Highland's Development Plans team. From our perspective, we saw a particular opportunity. The preparation of the new style local development plan is kind of coinciding and to some extent following on from some place planning activity that we've been very much involved in coordinating corporately to kind of a sub-regional level across Highland. And so there's a chance really to use those regional place plans that have been appearing to shape and simplify the new local development plan itself. In Highland, we currently have 4 local development plans, so there's also a dimension where we're going to replace those with a single new style plan. So it brings an opportunity to pick up alignment with NPF4. Something that we have tried to do to some extent through the review of our last old style plan that we've just had the examination report for. So we want to carry on that momentum, if you like, and this provides a great opportunity to do that, to link with the local outcome improvement plan and also community wealth building. So opportunities there, and with a more dynamic approach to the plan itself, opportunity to really bring the delivery program to the fore. And I think in Highland, we're particularly from the planner's perspective keen to get a better link there with the capital program of the council too.
Great, thanks, David. I think some clear aspirations you're looking to get out of it. So, Mary, how about yourself? Similar to what the others have said, or?
Yes, I would concur with the comments of quite a lot of colleagues there. I think for us, there was definitely a need to ensure better working between different departments towards place and place-based approaches. We're conscious that several services were probably working in isolation to a degree, and this offered an opportunity for us to come together to work better. The Hebrides is likely to be entering a period of significant investment in on and offshore renewables, and this is a really crossroads moment for us to capture that and to work together. So yeah, just concur with colleagues. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Mary. And that was great. And I think all of you had, really clear in terms of aspirations, but touching on some challenges. I wonder, maybe probing a bit more, did you envisage kind of more, any particular challenges or barriers at that sort of plan preparation stage? And what kind of difference maybe has working in this way made in terms of that? So, Mary, maybe, I know you said yourself, obviously, there was that kind of, sort of some kind of silo or sort of maybe not departments not working together. Any other kind of challenges, or was that the main one?
No, that was an aspect of it. But wider than that, we're similar to Highland, we're operating a very big geography here, and actually trying to resolve the kind of best approaches, geographies to address that, but also conscious with working in a rural context, but with a policy framework where some aspects of it are more relevant to us, for example, climate change, peat, that kind of thing, but others are less, there is a rural focus in MPF, but also quite urban-centric policies. So how we might address that jointly and actually bring a perspective on that. You'll be aware, or some authorities will be aware, colleagues, we've been subject to a cyber attack here in Comhairle and Siar, but I can come on to some detail about that later if that's more helpful. Also looking to see how we can best engage. Again, the geographies make this very difficult for us, and particularly around more specialist groups and groups identified in the Act and in MPF for us to engage with. And also within our organisation, the scope to increase the priority of planning and place internally.
Brilliant, thanks, Mary. And I think that was really clear in terms of just, some of the geographies specific kind of issues that you're kind of tackling. I suppose flipping maybe to Grant in a very different kind of geography, a very different context, have there been sort of some of the challenges that you've had from the outset, and maybe how has this process so far maybe started to help kind of resolve them?
Yeah, thank you. The challenges that we thought we would be facing from the outset really was the understanding how we were going to go forward in a new system, in a new process, and that actual the logistics of bringing people together, the necessary people together, and explaining to them the process as to being involved and the new process for producing a local development plan when it was new to us as well. And there was that sort of learning as we were going along and explaining a new system to a variety of partners. So they were for us some of the main challenges. But I think in terms of what the positives that have come out from that, I think it is an acknowledgement that in many ways we're in the same boat. It's new for everyone, so that's been useful, and everyone has wanted to help actually and to learn and provide their input. So that, and it's that we touched on earlier with colleagues about. There's that one of the opportunities from this was to help build relationships both within the council but outside, and this is simple things in terms of actually when you've met people it's easy to work with them, and it's there are sort of go-to contacts there, quite simple but fundamental things, and it gave us it was a focus for actually how we were going to gather that information and what we were going to use it for. So I think they were the main sort of challenges and then the differences that the process created for us or gave to us, and it still is. I mean, we were still ongoing with it.
Brilliant, thanks, Grant. And I think with some of those, that you talked about in terms of those opportunity to kind of build good relationships, I think we're all reflecting on a kind of post-COVID or COVID kind of way that we work, that we don't maybe naturally meet people in the corridors maybe we used to before, and you can kind of have that kind of organic collaboration. So I think that's a really good kind of point. How about you, David, in terms of kind of Highland, for yourself, in terms of kind of challenges or barriers at that kind of plan preparation kind of early stage, and maybe kind of glimmers of how they're maybe being resolved?
Yeah, I think across a council such as ours, certainly in our council, there are some officers and there are some teams out with planning who absolutely get the relevance of the plan to them, but I think there are also lots who don't. There are there is inevitably an attitude or a perception held by some that the local development plan is prepared by planners for the purposes of planning, which is a thing in a box, isn't it? That's kind of a prevailing attitude. But what we need to try and achieve through this new process is more of a buy-in at a corporate level across the piece, and absolutely maximising the effect of the development plan in a good way to assist with the delivery of services. There are though also challenges that we're all facing, aren't there, in terms of the expanded requirements and expectations of local development plans that have emerged through planning reform. We're also tackling there with resource constraints. So, there's an aspects of things we'll come on to discuss no doubt this afternoon, which are about trying to make the best of what we've got, and use things to best effect. And another aspect there, I think, is that one of the ways in which this is sort of expressing itself to us in the early stage we're at is that there are lots of people who are asking us for training on what's in NPF4 and what it means for them, to be blunt, and actually that'd be quite nice for us as well. We're all using NPF4 and Fury now, but we're also learning it at the same time. So we want to twist that around a wee bit and actually say, well, let's explore that as part of the preparation of the Highland Local Development Plan. So let's address those issues they've got as part of that collaborative approach going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And I think that was really, completely kind of backing up what Grant was saying about that. Everybody's doing a learning by doing approach that, it's new for everybody. So, yeah. Dominic, I'm going to come to you later because I know we've got a lot more kind of questions for Fife. You're further down the line than some others. So I'm maybe going to move on rather than asking you that question and kind of take us forward a little bit, because I think, as I said, we've got a lot to cover. So the first stage or the early stage of kind of working together is about establishing a place-based collaborative approach with the project team. And Kate, from my colleague Kate from ANDS, has offered to give us a quick kind of overview of just what's been involved with that stage where we've been working together, and then we'll have some kind of questions around that. But Kate, do you want to come in and give us a quick kind of overview of what's involved in that stage?
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, hi, I'm Kate, pleased to speak to you today. So I'm just going to introduce the first step of the process. And Trevor, I think, are you able to share? I think we've got a little slide just to remind everyone where we're at this point. So in that process sketch that we're talking through, this is the very earliest stage that we worked at with the pilot authorities. And the purpose of this step is really to support establishment of that place-based approach and place sort of with the project team, and to sort of shore up that kind of place leadership role that the planning team leads are really going to need to take through the process. So what's involved with this stage? Well, at this point, we have sort of quite small informal workshop sessions with the project team leads and some key agency representatives. We do a bit of scoping together, obviously sort of introductions, hearing a bit about the context the local authority is working with, talking through that place-based approach, what it means, why it's important, and examples that already exist maybe within the authority that they're kind of working in aspects of this way. And then through that interactive workshop, we look together at things like, Trevor, could you maybe next slide, please? We sort of work through a series of kind of interactive elements, looking at things like who's the project team. And when we talk about the project team, that's not just the planning team, it's the sort of who's the leadership input and who is that cross-service sort of wider team that you can draw on through your process. We think a bit about the geographies of the local areas for later sort of focus work and area scale. We do a bit of audience mapping, so sort of thinking about all the audiences we're going to need to engage through the process, because obviously we're bringing that key agency input, but there's a whole range of other audiences that we know through the regs that you're going to need to speak to, including not least communities. So a bit of unpacking of that. Governance, sort of how are you going to get that kind of buy-in and oversight of the plan process and the benefits that governance can kind of bring to that, and sort of again just a pattern of rough milestones. What we definitely don't want to do is come into a process and set things off, timeframes off. So we look quite carefully at the timeframes that teams are working with and where we can come in at the best points across that to give the input. And in terms of what that does, we're hoping that this is helping develop that understanding with the team of that place-based approach to, consider the collective milestones for the partnership working, to establish that kind of team feeling between the agencies and the project team, and to get those really strong foundations for the team to take this leadership role on the place-based approach. And of the things that we've talked through just there today, in terms of these are all sort of tools that other teams, wider teams that are not pilot agencies can access. We've got access to things like the project team template, the place-based presentation packs, SWOT analysis templates, audience mapping, prioritization, timeline diagrams, storytelling, so you can tell a presentation of why you want to do this in a certain way. And we also have access, if anyone would like them, to sort of, we use an interactive platform called Miro, and we're happy to share these things so you can run it yourself as a workshop with your team. Thanks. Next slide, Trevor. So, Heather, do I?
No, I think that's, well, maybe stop sharing because we're going to come to the Menti question after. But that was really good in terms of just giving us a bit of an overview of what's involved in that stage. So thanks, Kate. And I know, Kate, you're going to come back in and explain other stages. So don't go too far. So obviously all our authorities that we've got on the call today have been through this stage, and Kate kind of alluded to some of the benefits that we think when we were pulling this together, kind of creating this, we thought would come out of this. But it'd be good to hear, some of the benefits that you've found in terms of adopting this sort of early approach. So maybe Dominic, starting with you, it's probably a while ago when you did that kind of collaborative kind of team work, but what benefits at that stage were you finding?
It's probably a bit different for us because I think when we started, we already had a project structure set up and a governance arrangement set up. So it was more kind of a case of perhaps of reaffirming and just tweaking what we had. I mean, because some of the issues we had in terms of corporate buy-in, which have already been covered. So it's how do we tweak that? So it was more about kind of tweaking the arrangements that we already had. So we didn't actually go through that stage ourselves when we set up when we did the pilot work with A&DS earlier. So it's probably not quite the same for us because we had a structure already set up, but it kind of reaffirmed that where we need to tweak things in terms of kind of get that buy-in, who we need to be involved in, who we need to be involved in the project, and that's the kind of it kind of reaffirmed the kind of approach that we were taking.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Even though not quite going through it at that stage, it was that kind of almost, I guess it's that backing up what you're already doing, or maybe making it kind of more visible. So I think that's great. Mary, from your perspective, what were the kind of benefits that you found in terms of that stage?
Yeah, I think it really gave us confidence much earlier on to take a different perspective on things. Having colleagues from E&DS just to help us try and view things from a different perspective, and how our structures were and how our kind of model and delivery formats were, got us to think about new geographies and think about whom and how we take stock earlier in the process. So it's been really formative in that sense, and it's also enabled us, or empowered us, I suppose, to make connections much earlier in the process as well. So positive in that sense.
Great, no, thanks, Mary. That's brilliant. And Grant, in terms of Midlothian, you were quite far, to some extent similar, in the process. Did you find actually this process similarly kind of helped give that sort of confidence and that sort of reaffirming, or did you find kind of other benefits of going through this step?
Yeah, did find that reaffirming. In terms of the agenda, I did put down 3 key benefits for us, and I think there's that efficiency of collecting the information, having the parties all together and going through that, identifying who are the parties that we need to speak with in a sort of coherent, rational way, and then being able to collect information efficiently, because there are parties that we would have had to have gone to probably in the past and may have gone to separately or in a smaller group, not as collectively together. So, and that's all information that we were collecting that we would have to was necessary for the evidence report and also the proposed plan. So that was a key benefit, the efficiency of it. And for us, I know we touched on it earlier about one of the reasons for going for the pilot project was that to increase people's awareness and understanding of what a local development plan is, what it grapples with. And that very much came through from that for those early stages, because you could explain what it is and what it does and how it relates to people's work, what they can get from it and what we get from them being involved. And I don't quite know whether this is what you wanted me to say at this point, but it was the different approaches. For example, that when we were asking people about one of the stages where imagine you're sending a postcard from the future, that made us think. It's a reverse way of setting what's your vision and how, and thinking about how you actually achieve that vision, and that was not something that we'd looked at before. So I suppose from our point of view, it's the efficiency, the awareness, and the different ways of thinking, and the rigor of that. When you've got that many people together, you've really got to think it through. When you've got that many people and that amount of effort and resources being put into it, to use that opportunity to get to harvest as much information as you can. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Grant. I think that was really useful. And yeah, the postcard that you sort of alluded to is the corporate stage, which we'll go on to a bit more. But I think, obviously this stage is about trying to kind of shape some of the thinking to feed into that corporate one. So a good kind of bridging there. David, how about yourself in terms of kind of Highland? Obviously, you mentioned about your one, you're kind of bringing 4 plans into one plan. So that kind of idea of actually getting the team together. Did you find kind of benefits in doing it in this way?
Yes, and I think the first thing to explain is to attendees is that in Highland we haven't just had one meeting. There's actually been 2 or 3 key milestone events with ANDS involved in a couple of those, in terms of key discussions that were had with the development plans team, and then with the director and heads of service included, and that's been a really useful process. And how I would describe, the role of ANDS in that process is effectively as our critical friend. So whilst yes, this collaborative offer is only available to the 6 to help directly the 6 authorities. Maybe other authorities think about who could play that critical friend role to help us to challenge ourselves in the way that we prepare the plan, and the way that we organise ourselves internally to prepare the plan. I think this helps us to ensure that we have a new or refreshed approach to plan making. And at the same time, we have to be kind of respectful of the previous approaches, how we prepared those 4 plans previously, and not reinvent the wheel for the sake of it, throw the baby out with the bathwater, as it were. So there are aspects of what we've done before which, subject to review, can be done again. Those processes, those methods can be used again. They've got value, but yes, it's about that challenging ourselves process. Very useful.
Great, thanks, David. And I think that's really, and echoing the points before about, as much of this is about reaffirming the kind of processes that you might have gone through and making them a bit more kind of visible. So I've got CAG colleagues, key agency colleagues on the call, and I'm now going to turn my attention to you, because this has been a collaborative approach with you playing a big part of it as well. So I'm curious to kind of hear, you know, what benefits that you've found in terms of that early stage of, you know, sort of making this kind of working in this kind of collaborative place-based way. So I'll maybe go to Andrew first.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Yeah, I absolute agreement with what I've heard so far from local authority colleagues about kind of the opportunities and the efficiencies of working together. Historic Environment Scotland have been plugged into the development planning for a long time, but our focus has inevitably been policy, protection and assessment. So therefore, this new collaborative approach has kind of empowered us to think a bit differently about how we deal with development planning and indeed how we deal with evidence for development planning. So colleagues in local authorities may know that we're giving out a lot more different types of evidence now, evidence that supports national planning framework beyond historic environment assets in its way of delivering net zero or vacant and derelict land or health and well-being outcomes and things like that. So this kind of empowering of us to do that comes from working with new partners. Previously, with key agency development plan work, it would inevitably be ourselves, SEPA and NatureScot around the table. But having so many more different aspects around the table has kind of really helped us kind of formulate what it is that the historic environment can do for all the other things and, you know, how they all act together. And so that initial bit about setting out who does what, who is going to be around the table, that kind of cross-fertilization of ideas has really helped us kind of formulate not just our involvement in the 6 pilots, but in terms of how we give evidence, and I'll probably say more about the evidence later, but how we do that with all of the local authorities going forward.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And Debbie, from your perspective in terms of being involved in the process, are you finding benefits?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been a great process to be involved in. I think it's really helped kind of set the scene kind of quite early on. We've always kind of harped on about early engagement, and this is just sort of perfect for that. It's good to get to know everybody involved in the plan making process and for them to get to know us at the key agencies. You know, it helps to break down barriers. You know, maybe they didn't fully understand what specific agencies did, and you know, I think just really sort of getting that message across early has been really helpful. Also, just it's been great for sort of sharing ideas. I think some people have said as well about, you know, it makes them think in a different way, and it makes you a lot more aware of, you know, what the council's thinking is, and then the council's more aware of what the key agency's sort of thoughts are, you know, thinking in a different way. And I think as well it shows a lot of commitment. You know, it is quite resource intensive, so to be involved in the process, it's, you know, showing that we are, you know, we're all committed to, we all want a really good plan that's focused on sort of place-based outcomes. So it's good to kind of have that shared sort of understanding right at the very start. So yeah, I found it really helpful.
Great, thanks, Debbie. And Naveed, what are some of the benefits that you're finding? I mean, maybe you might, you know, say yourself, but you're, you know, relatively new, I suppose, in terms of kind of feeding into the kind of planning process. So I wonder maybe if you can kind of share some of the sort of insights from your agency and being kind of plugged into the process.
Thanks, Heather, and hi everyone. My name is Naveed, and I'm one of the partnership managers in Public Health Scotland. So those of you who know Public Health Scotland as an agency, we are relatively a new agency, and we were established just around the same time or just shortly before the pandemic hit. And I'm part of a team that's called Place and Health in All Policies. And that is also a new team, and the function of our team is to bring a public health lens to localized working. So when the opportunity came up for this piece of work, we were really pleased because you know, it allowed us a platform to be able to get into kind of like those localized working setup and partnerships, and get to know you know, our local colleagues at whether at the key agencies group level or really work closely with the council colleagues. So it was a brilliant opportunity to basically form a foundation for long-term partnerships that we really kind of like cherished in Public Health Scotland. The other thing that really kind of like was important for us is that Public Health Scotland holds a lot of evidence and data, and particularly quantitative data and more qualitative data. So this platform allowed us to share, those data and evidence in a kind of like a systematic, efficient way in a way that is really beneficial to local partners. So rather than kind of like us trying to find who can use this data and when they can use it, this platform allowed us to, that sharing to happen. And just I take touch on one more thing, and that is about collective voice. As I said, health in all policies is one of our key mandates, and tackling health inequalities is one of the key mandates of Public Health Scotland. And again, you can't tackle health inequalities without addressing social determinants of health, and everything that's kind of like goes in LDPs and evidence reports is linked one way or another, to social determinants of health. So we were really pleased to have that voice and collective voice around the table to raise those issues.
Brilliant, thanks, Naveed. And I know we'll touch on a bit more kind of later on around just some of that, what has been some of the kind of data and useful kind of data, that's helped with the process. So that's really good, kind of bringing that in. I want to kind of move us on, and I know we want to get a bit of audience participation at this stage. So I want to bring in our second Menti question. So Trevor, if you can share your slide again, and if we can flick to, some of you'd already started to answer it on the kind of Menti one, but our second one is, how successful in establishing a place-based collaborative work within your work have you been? So we'll give a wee minute for people to answer that one. Lots of you logged in. So interesting, this one is a bit more kind of 50-50 and almost in terms of success and not success. I'll give a few more minutes to. Okay, someone's on. This is really helpful to get your kind of insight and your experience. Brilliant. Thanks, Trevor. So I think maybe now we'll go on to our kind of next bit. So if we stop sharing. And then we want to move on to talk a bit more about the corporate engagement, which is the next kind of stage of the process. So once you've done your kind of team collective kind of working, it's now moving on to the corporate kind of working. And Kate again is going to give us a little bit of a kind of overview of what's involved in that stage.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, Trevor, if you're able to share the next wee sort of slide set, that'd be brilliant. Thanks. So the next step of the process that we've been following with pilot authorities is to get that sort of really establish that place-based collaborative approach with the wider corporate team. So going out beyond the plan team to sort of get that cross-departmental buy-in and collaboration. So I guess in part that is helping establish that place leadership role again for the planning team, because as we know, like there's massive ambition within the new policy context that we're working with MPF4, but planning on its own can't deliver, what's there. So it's going to be really, really important that there's these different approaches, and there'll be lots of steps along the way to kind of getting that delivered. But at the start, bringing services together and starting to develop a kind of shared understanding and story of change, thinking about place collectively at across the whole local authority can be really helpful, we've felt, in starting to identify what key relationships and problems that, relationships you need and problems that you're going to have to address together that no one person or organisation can solve. So we also knew that evidence isn't just data. So a lot of sources can be kind of found from your desktop, but some of the evidence you're going to need will be held, out with existing digital data sources that are accessible by local authority planning teams or the key agencies. So it's really important that, there's ways to capture conversations and collective mapping of some of this evidence that you're going to need for your plans. So the way that we did this, next slide, please, was to pull together a corporate workshop plan. So it takes a morning or an afternoon, 2.5 hours, with the project team, senior leadership representatives of your key departments or services within the council, and key agency representatives from the key agencies group. In general, these end up being maybe between 30 and 50 people at these things that we've hosted before with different authorities. And the sort of information that we run through within the session is getting that sort of background and context, setting out what the place-based collaborative approach is to that wider corporate team, to get a bit of an understanding through kind of discussion and mapping together of what the existing place is like, so exchanging knowledge and insights about what the key strengths are for the area, the key opportunities, any big challenges or drivers for change within the local authority, and doing that across all those different teams and departments. Doing a bit of thinking about the future place, so as was mentioned earlier, sort of that future casting, writing a postcard from 50 years in the future is one of the little devices we use, but exchanging knowledge also about any sort of existing strategies, plans and investments that are going to have a bearing on the lifetime of the plan, and getting that all captured for the plan team to be able to follow up with. So what are the outcomes of that as far as the agencies? We're hoping it help raise awareness of MPF and this new sort of place-based, people-centred, delivery-focused approach. We're hoping it can secure that early buy-in from that tends to be more senior representatives that come to this big workshop. So getting that kind of leadership buy-in so that they can ask their teams to follow the plan journey with you as you go through. It'll help support those ongoing conversations that you'll need through the next stages of the plan. It'll bring in the sources of evidence that you need from work being done by other teams, and hopefully catalyse that kind of more corporate commitment to working in line with the place principle. So you're seeing here some of the outputs of the workshops that we did with one of the pilot authorities, but again, within the Place Skills for Plan Making resource, we've got things there that could help you run a similar session. So we've got the presentation pack, we've got workshop agendas, facilitator guides, template participant agendas, tips on how to facilitate a session like this. We can also provide you, if you get in touch with us, with interactive Miro versions if you want to run your own session. And if you were thinking of doing something like this yourselves, the key agencies are well versed now in following this kind of template, and I think where sort of sufficient notice and capacity allows that, statutory agencies would be able to wrap in and attend a similar kind of workshop should other authorities wish to run something like that. Thanks, Heather.
Great, thanks, Kate. And I think that gives a really good snapshot and just shows the kind of resources that are open to be able to be used, and we want them to be used, across the board. And I think, Kate, obviously you gave some of the sort of, benefits and sort of value that we found in the early ones of kind of doing them. I suppose I'm curious to hear from the local authorities about, I know we've kind of talked a little bit about those sort of benefits and the need to make sure that the plan is not a plan for planners created by planners. So I suppose, does anybody have any reflections on this stage? I know obviously Mary and Dominic and Grant, you've been through this stage, and sort of, maybe just a bit of reflections on, what came out of it that was maybe unexpected from this in terms of having that corporate kind of session. And have you found so far, and I know for some of you it's been quite fresh, but has it had a ripple in terms of other collaboration across the council? So I wonder if Mary's nodding, so I'm going to go to you, Mary, if you're happy to kind of share some insight there.
Yes, thanks, Heather. Happy to come in. Just before I go into that, though, in my previous comments around support from ADS, for example, on giving us that confidence and a wider perspective. Can I also give thanks to that core of key agency colleagues that have been in with us from the beginning as well. Thanks. The workshop itself worked really well for us. It brought a disparate selection of colleagues together, particularly internal colleagues, our external stakeholders we were in some ways more familiar with and more engaged, but it brought a disparate group together, I would say. It reinforced some of the issues that we'd anticipated. So actually having that consensus going forward was really, a real boost, a real really affirmed our direction, I think. It also, there were some surprises in that it captured some less tangible aspects of place. For example, identity, language, culture, these kind of aspects that are not always apparent in land use planning. Similarly, the kind of engagement we've had with Naveed and his colleagues about, the intangibles around health and well-being that we've found harder to incorporate in planning. So there was an alignment there. We're very much likely to use this as an engagement method going forward, again, because of our big geography and trying to engage with a variety of groups. Colleagues have all spoken very positively about the Miro platform and how actually engaged they became in the workshop session. It's a really focused tool, and 2.5 hours you get so much done that you wouldn't have got done with 40 odd folk in a room, I don't think. So really wholly endorse it as a tool and as a mechanism. And actually it was a seniors, managers, directors kind of level engagement piece, and it was a brilliant leveler as well. And actually for all they came with particular service briefs, they actually engaged in it with a planning and place focus. So really positive in that sense.
Brilliant, thanks Mary. I think that's some great kind of insights, and I think I know you got good feedback from some of your senior managers, having participated in it, and we know, sometimes 2.5 hours, even an hour out of someone's, senior's diary is quite a lot to get. But, to get good feedback from it, it was really, really good as well.
Yeah.
So,
our original workshop session was actually scheduled the week after we suffered a cyber attack, a whole authority cyber attack on 7th of November, and we were due to meet, I think, the following week, wasn't it, Kate? So we knew that we wouldn't have had the attention and the focus of senior colleagues at that time. So we did put it off until we've just held it recently in January. So really positive tool.
Great, thanks Mary. And I wonder maybe Trevor will get you to stop sharing so we can see more of the screen. So that's great, thanks Trevor. Grant, how about yourself in terms of kind of Midlothian? What was the kind of experience that you found in terms of doing this kind of corporate session, and has there been any subsequent sort of benefits or even challenges in terms of working together?
It was a very good opportunity for all of the parties there to get an understanding of the issues of the particular areas of place, and it was the benefit of that was we weren't collecting high level generic information. It was actually specific detailed information about place and about, as you were saying earlier, about culture, about assets of an area, and it made us think, particularly in relation to with an eye to the proposed plan and the content of that, and in terms of if we've got a policy framework in NPF4, what bits would we be putting into the local development plan that are more place-based, rather than a specific guidance policy about to either protect, enhance particular local matters relevant to Midlothian that are perhaps not captured within, understandably, within policy framework in NPF4. So that was really helpful for us, and it was learning, and as Mary was mentioned it about going through that session, the skills that you and the techniques that are used there, they're applicable in other areas as well. So while you may choose particular areas, you can apply it elsewhere. So it was that gaining the more detailed knowledge of particular areas. And I think it wasn't just beneficial for us. You could really feel from the call that other people that may not, things that you're not aware that other people don't know that. So and there was sort of mutual learning, which was really useful, I thought.
Great, that's great. Well, I think that's brilliant. Dominic, I know we're going to ask you a bit more kind of questions when we kind of move to the next stage. So I wonder maybe if I bring in some of the key agency colleagues at this stage, because obviously you've been involved with that kind of corporate workshop. And, you know, what were some of the kind of benefits or sort of challenges that you found in terms of working in this way? I mean, some of the comments obviously picked up around, you know, sort of it flushed out some of the key issues and it sort of reaffirmed them. Were you finding that, especially thinking about your sort of areas of sort of interest? So maybe come to Andrea and then Debbie.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Yeah, I mean, this stage really was the thing that offered us the challenge about what evidence do we bring to the table? What do we come with that will help us engage in those conversations? I mean, if I turned up at one of these with a list of a number of how many listed buildings there are in Fife, for example, that's not going to add a huge amount to the conversation. So in order for us to kind of you know, get the most out of, you know, collaboratively working around place, we needed to think more about what kind of evidence that we need to find. And so that's kind of why we've kind of focused on that kind of evidence around buildings at risk. You know, where are they? You know, what type of buildings are they? You know, measuring that against the index of multiple deprivation, looking at where we're giving investment, you know, who are we doing that investment with? All of that kind of evidence we kind of needed to go into this kind of approach to be able to contribute. So the key thing I think for me then is once we've brought that evidence, it's having all of these different what you would think on paper were different topic areas, etc., you know, around the table, really talking around an area and saying, well, look, actually, this is, you know, this is happening here, and this is connected to that. And so all of this evidence starts to become really tangible. And if it becomes tangible, then you can start getting answers to kind of sort of fixing problems or building upon opportunities. So as I say, I think this point has really kind of worked its way back the way for us to kind of create how we deal now with the new development plan system. So, you know, we're very much bought into it.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And I think that's also making a point about, I suppose this stage is coming at quite an early stage in the evidence report stage, so it's kind of bringing it much more up front, which again, I think is maybe a different order of where previous plans have maybe done this at a kind of later stage. So that's great. Debbie, from yourself in terms of kind of Transport Scotland, what have you found in terms of this corporate kind of stage feeding in?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what Andrew said, that it helps sort of shape and tailor the information that local authorities are looking for from us. You know, each local authority has got its own sets of challenges and opportunities, and it's really good just to be able to discuss that, and then sort of understand, you know, and maybe not even at the workshop, but maybe like after that, sort of being able to gain more information for a local authority about the things that are important to them, you know, in a sort of discussion. That's been sort of really good, because some information that might, you know, be relevant to one authority is, you know, another authority isn't as fussed about that, so they want to focus on something else. So that's really good to sort of take away and then be able to maybe give them information. But it's just been really helpful getting a sort of overarching understanding of the problems and opportunities and challenges that each local authority faces. So it's been a really good way of getting to know that. And it's also been really positive. I think everybody who's been involved in these workshops has been really, you know, positive about it, and they're all going into it really enthusiastic and a sort of collective way. I think it's been mentioned already that we're all in the same boat, and we're all trying to be helpful and assist each other in this new way of working, and that really comes through in these workshops.
Great, thanks, Debbie. And I think so. Lots of nods when you were talking about that positivity around the table. So I think that's shared across others. I'm really curious, obviously, to kind of probe a bit more in terms of some of the kind of challenges around that sort of data gathering and sort of reaching different audiences. And I suppose I'm interested maybe to hear maybe from Dominic in terms of kind of Fife, and maybe David in terms of Highland, both at very different kind of stages of the process, how you've brought in the sort of community sort of input into the process of kind of evidence gathering. Dominic, from your perspective at the stage that you're at, and maybe David, how you're going to bring in the community into that. So Dominic, do you want to share a bit?
Yeah, so in Fife, obviously involving our residents and our communities, and not just our residents, our local businesses and other specific groups are really important. And we were thinking of on the lines of actually what we want to do with the evidence report is particularly to identify the issues that we think need to be tackled through the LDP. So actually the key thing is how do we ask our communities what the issues are about their place. So we set up an informal survey using Microsoft Forms run by our comms team to kind of understand from our residents what they felt what they like. It was a very simple form, a very simple questionnaires about what do they like about their place, what they don't like about, but particularly what are the issues that they feel need to be tackled in their place. And some of the answers that came back were very interesting. They fed into evidence report, and it's kind of highlighted key things that perhaps might not have come up in terms of access to leisure facilities and things like that from certain parts of our communities. Very insightful comments about they drive somewhere else because it's easier to go somewhere else than to actually use their own local town centres, which is interesting for multiple different ways in terms of thinking about how living well locally might need to be rolled out across Fife. And we also tapped into our local business community as well. We had a similar survey with businesses, and again, some very interesting comments coming back in terms of that perhaps we might not have thought of in terms of actually the quality of place, and there was the quality of the place and the environment that they were working in was actually really in some cases causing them issues and other places not. So we've done various different formal surveys, and we've also done more specific bespoke pieces of work with gypsies and travellers and children's young people in particular. But yeah, it's been very interesting engaging with communities on those lines, and we've tapped into existing work done by our communities team as well in terms of using place standard. But all of it is kind of fed into where we're going, and it's been added alongside all the work we've done alongside with the key agencies and ANDS. It's kind of built a very interesting picture about some of the challenges that we need to address.
Great, thanks, Dominic. And David, in terms of kind of Highland, obviously you mentioned a lot about the kind of area place plans that are underway. You know, what maybe give us a picture in terms of your kind of plans about bringing in the kind of voice of the community into this evidence gathering stage.
Yeah, and that area place planning activity is certainly a key way where we're really conscious that efforts are already being made by the council, various people across the council, by communities, by partners in that process. And we really need to maximise the use of the information that's being gathered. And we also we're always mindful, aren't we, of the need to be mindful of the need to avoid engagement fatigue out there. So absolutely critical to make the best of what we've got coming in. And just to give folks an idea of the sort of scale of areas that this area place planning activity is being done by, is everything from the city of Inverness through to the county of Caithness. It gives you sort of an idea of the scale of the areas, and there's about 10 or 11 of those areas. And those areas tie in very well with our sub-Highland community planning partnership areas, the work being coordinated there. So again, there's opportunity to maximise the use of existing information out there. In terms of broader engagement, what I'm saying here is looking ahead to what we're moving on to in the coming months. But the launch of making available place standard tool is something we're going to do, and then promote that, and also have facilitated use of it too. And also we are developing our evidence story in storyboarding, and for that, the way that we're undertaking that, where this is not promoted by Miro, this event, but we are using Miro because you know, we are finding it so useful and better than so many other tools that we have had a look at. And it's proving to be really useful for us to develop the story of the big headline issues for Highland, and then the different scales of place, the sub-regions and communities, as well as pan-Highland stories. And then to use that for interactive discussions, collaborative discussions with people, to check whether they think we've missed anything, whether we've got it right, whether we're focusing on the right things. And that we're at an early stage of that process, but that's what we're rolling out over the coming weeks to begin to engage more closely with key partners. And then we want to make some of the outputs of that, we have a kind of a cut-off point where we'll make some of the outputs of that work available to the public in possibly a bit of an edited form, but make that available so that again they can interact with that and provide feedback too. Thank you.
Great, thanks, David. And I think that's a really good bridge when we kind of look at more in terms of that kind of collective mapping at that kind of next layer down. I'm going to move us on. I'm conscious of time and we've still got a lot to get through. I know we've got a Menti question coming up. So if Trevor wants to kind of start a slide and then we move on to the next slide over. So this is in two parts. So I think, you know, the first one is about, you know, your senior leadership team and support in terms of kind of place-based approach, and we'll give a wee minute in terms of feeding that in, and then we've got another part of this question as well. And I suppose what I would say as well, we hope to get enough time to have a couple of questions from the audience in terms of the Q&A, so please put your questions in the Q&A function and we'll be able to hopefully get a couple of those time dependent. So that's great. Quite a big majority in terms of kind of supporting that. You kind of feel your senior leadership have really kind of support in terms of this place-based approach. I wonder maybe if we flick on to the next Menti question. And then that kind of question here in terms of kind of success in capturing cross-service input, particularly in that kind of early plan preparation stage. So again, coming forward, quite a lot of positivity, lots of support of that kind of success in that cross-service input. Great. Thanks, Trevor. So we now want to move on to, if we stop sharing the slide. We now want to move on to talking about kind of the collective mapping phase. So again, Kate, I think you're going to come in and give us a little bit of a snapshot.
Yeah. Thanks, Heather. So, and Trevor, I think we've got a wee slide for this bit as well. So, the bit we're moving on to is, yeah, how we sort of move from that whole place scale, I guess, down to a local area one, and I guess within that why we do that. So, essentially, the next bit of support that we've moved on to is kind of mapping and exploring evidence, and then by this point in the process, a lot of that kind of initial data and evidence gathering will be well underway by the teams, and you know, for those sort of topics set out in NPF4 that I know everyone's going to be looking to capture their evidence across. So, and lots of that mapping will be coming together across, you know, at a strategic scale across the whole local authority area. And while it's very possible to gather certain evidence and data sets in that way at that whole authority scale. I think what we were starting to find is to make sense of what all that information means across a whole geography at once is really, really challenging. So all these layers of things that kind of land in a place, how do you start to make sense of that, and trying to deal with that across a really, really wide geography was, you know, within the confines of workshops and things, was just going to be really, really tricky. So what we set about doing was to try and see how we could address those sort of complex challenges effectively, those individual policies and topics, and to consider them holistically within a place. You know, and given as an example, something like the climate crisis, we can't do that just by looking at one of those topics in isolation. So by bringing all different strands of data together in one place and bringing all those different services or organisations that have some role in kind of making a difference to it together, we figured that was going to be, that was going to make sense, was our sort of hypothesis. So by focusing in at an area scale, we would be able to do that more meaningful collective mapping and analysis of what does the data seem to be saying for this place, what needs to happen here, a finer grain look at the sort of local context and challenges and opportunities that seem to be suggested for the plan, and I guess establishing a kind of methodology that you can then apply to other areas within the local authority. So what was involved at this stage? Again, Trevor, next slide, please. The surgery, we developed a sort of, rather than a big workshop with lots of people, we thought this was the kind of conversation that was going to be more productive in smaller groups. So we've got a kind of more informal session agenda that we worked up that you replicate maybe 3 or more times with just different groups of really key people from agencies and place-based services that you know have got data or information or assets that are really key to that local area. You can widen this out, obviously. In some of these workshops, we've had like registered social landlords, health colleagues, emergency services, and very much so this is the kind of exercise that could be replicated with other audience groups beyond the sort of agency support. So the areas we've kind of been working with are things like community plan sort of scale of areas or groups of council wards, and it's just for anyone that's thinking of doing this themselves, it's just thinking, you know, pragmatically, what is a scale that we can replicate this at across our authority would be, you know, how you might start to think about which areas and how you might divide this up. So in advance of the workshop, you can have that, you know, collective call out, obviously, for evidence that you want people to bring. So within the workshop itself, we bring together a bit of what's already known about the local context, community perspectives, if you have those already through engagement you've been doing or through, you know, community planning, colleagues might have stuff ready that can feed in. We developed that understanding about this particular local area a little, what its strengths, opportunities, challenges and drivers for change are, just to that finer grain. We start to do a bit of understanding about the future again for that place and thinking about what plans, strategies, activities and investments do we have active here in this place. And then again, agencies and other colleagues from other services are kind of doing that work with their teams in the run up to the workshop. So they're coming with that intelligence for the plan team to capture. And these, again, this is an online workshop that we've developed, but you could do this in real life as well. So we would envisage once you've done that for an area, you could replicate it. We spend a bit of time with the team after showing how you kind of analyse post-it content that you capture from these discussions and bring it together. And I guess we're finding that this is really helpful, just making sense of those sort of NPF4 topics in the context of a place. And the workshops are working at 2 levels, I guess, one to inform the evidence, but secondly, starting these collective conversations that you're really going to need as you follow through the next stages of the plan and build towards, you know, places that you need to take coordinated action with other services for place-based and master plans. We know that these kind of workshops bring out that sort of softer evidence. So this type of information isn't necessarily sitting somewhere in a GIS or in a data source. With the Fife team, for example, we were looking at a place where there was big investment from Network Rail, big sort of river improvements, active travel infrastructure going in. There's energy investment plan, but that's not sitting somewhere in a data source. That's something you need to get people to speak about and explain. So that was really helpful for that. And again, just in terms of like, you know, I think there's the potential for some of these discussions to flush out where there might be any internal sort of disputes or things that you need to get ironed out together as well, and opportunities for that future work, hopefully. So in terms of the tools and resources that could help wider teams that want to replicate this sort of approach, again, we've got presentation packs, workshop agendas, facilitator guides, tips on how to facilitate these kind of sessions. And again, we have sort of interactive Miro versions of the templates if you would like to have access to those, to just get in touch with the team. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. We'll stop sharing and we'll see the panelists again. And I think at this stage, you know, I'm really curious to hear perhaps maybe from Grant and Dominic about, you know, how you found this approach in terms of plotting like so much detail at a smaller area kind of scale. And I suppose a kind of follow on to that, was there anything that kind of came out as a kind of local strength in this process that maybe you hadn't anticipated that being the case? So what was kind of unexpected kind of coming out of this sort of, you know, plotting the detail at that kind of smaller scale? So maybe Grant, I'll go to you and then go to Dominic.
Just to deal with, come to the second question about the local strengths. I don't mean this the way it's going to sound, but there was a lot of confirmation of what planning officers thought, and that was really useful actually for us, because in terms of what the issues were in that area, because for us to get backed up by other parties, and then and they were expressing the similar concerns, issues that we were on matters, was really useful for us. So I hesitate to say this, but there wasn't particular new issues coming forward, but that was very useful for us, because, you know, that is evidence that's coming forward, and so we would then be going forward on the basis that that's come from a collective. It's not just from one group of people. So that was really useful. And what the strengths that were came forward as well, that that a lot of the issues and the thoughts and views of other people that were in alignment about in terms of as to what the issues were, what the difficulties were, and in terms of, so that again that was very useful for us in terms of the impact of the over the last 20 years, that you know, the huge scale of growth in housing development, and what the implications of that are for the road network, for education, for healthcare. But there was also what came forward as well was the high level of local resident volunteering, and how that's reflected in a lot of partners' work, and it's a real strength. There's very high levels of volunteering from residents, and a high level of, and that's reflected in a high level of community engagement, which is really good in terms of producing a plan. I think it was that sort of confirmation of issues from a range of different parties, I think, was one of the main things that came out. It was quite, it was that was not a surprise in many ways, but it was really interesting and very valuable.
Great, thanks, Grant. And Dominic, similar. What did you find similar?
Yeah, for us it was a very useful exercise. So much that we rolled it out as whilst we did work with Levermouth with ANDS, I think we had 4 or 5 individual kind of workshop sessions, as Kate said, with smaller groups on Levermouth. We were able to take that work and that model and roll it out ourselves. We used Miro. We recreated the boards in Miro to roll that out for the other 6 localities that we've been using in Fife for the geographies for our evidence report, and it was really, really informative doing that. I mean, we did, so some of the challenges that we rolled it out internally, and it was at relatively short notice, but it got some very good discussions going, which have informed our evidence report in terms of understanding the issues. And in many cases, as kind of Grant was saying, it was accentuating or confirming what data was already saying about the place and what perhaps we felt about the place. But in other cases, it was kind of telling us how, perhaps a surprise for me, was it was telling, kind of coming out how the strength of some of our local communities, their strength and how their community and the level of community cohesion and how resilient they actually are. And it was quite interesting for me in that some parts of Fife, which you might kind of label as having some of the biggest challenges, but their kind of resilience and the strength of community and how that relates to living well locally was actually kind of meant they were actually got a fairly good starting point in terms of kind of going forward, whereas there are other parts of Fife that perhaps don't embody living well locally quite so well, and they've still got some quite significant challenges. But it's kind of making those connections in terms of living well locally to kind of other ways our communities are functioning that was coming out through these sessions was kind of really illuminating. It was the way it was highlighting the kind of variety of challenges across Fife and the kind of the different approaches that were going to be needed. But yeah, all in all, it was very we found it hugely beneficial, and actually say kind of rolled it out ourselves. And I think we got really good buy-in actually from other services and coming to these sessions. A couple were struggled in terms of availability, but we managed to capture them later. Although perhaps one of the challenges we did face was it was easy to get people to attend the sessions in a way, but getting information out of them in advance in terms of mapping existing initiatives to kind of populate the mirror boards was not always so easy. So we got some data, but not always all the data that we actually wanted to. But having said that, we've got a very good output at the end, and it's been really informative in terms of kind of developing our understanding of our communities in Fife.
Great, thanks, Dominic. And I think a good lesson learned from for everyone there in terms of, you know, actually the hard works in advance of the workshop, not just the workshop itself. So, you know, building in enough time to kind of, try and extract as much information in advance of the workshop. A really good kind of lesson there. I want to move us on because I know we're getting tighter and tighter for our closer and closer to our finish time. And I suppose I want to maybe do a bit of a kind of, you know, we'll look at the Minty. Mary, you've got your hand up here. Was there something you wanted to come in on that?
Yeah, just a point, if I can share, that I hope benefits all, aside from the support we've had through the Cages group. Just when authorities are getting to that stage to try and come down to a more local based level, given the strong evidence-based focus of the stage of the plan, to really think about your geographies and your localities around how data is available to you. This process has really made us think, you know, traditionally we've maybe thought at island or ward level or collective wards, but actually if that's not how data is best available to you in this new world order, you know, rethink your geographies. So just a tip.
Thanks, Mary. And I saw a few nods, and I think, you know, others at that stage in the process kind of, you know, giving good thought to that, you know, in terms of kind of what is place-based, you know, geographies. You can see it, you've already started filling in the Menti question, which is great. So, you know, fourth question here, we're wanting to just get a bit more kind of thought on what you think are the kind of falling sort of factors in terms of, you know, barriers or sort of, you know, necessary ingredients in terms of that place-based collaborative way of working. So I think we can see the different ones sliding up there in terms of kind of skills, that sort of leadership buy-in and support being so kind of critical in terms of that. So I'll give you a wee minute to fill that in, but lots of the different kind of factors coming up here. That's great. Brilliant. So we want to move on to the fourth kind of part of our talk with our panelists today, which I guess it's a bit more of a kind of step back and kind of think about overall sort of adopting a place-based collaborative way of working. And I suppose some of you have kind of touched on it, but you know, just very quickly, I suppose, would you recommend working in this way based on your experiences with working with key agencies and ANDS? And maybe to go on very briefly to say, what is your top 3 takeaways from the journey so far? So maybe I start with David. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, absolutely. And so first thing I'd say is yes. You know, really keen to. We are still at an early stage, but really keen to work this through. It is in part building on some good practices from the past, but it is also a fresh, broader approach with all the key agencies. I think a point Andrew made, you know, historically we've had the SEA consultation authorities particularly close to us working on certain issues, but to broaden that approach out to cover the wide range of key agency issues would be great. And you know, that perhaps provides opportunity to unlock some data you do have, or data that you can help us get. And you know, hearing what I think Deborah was saying, you know, about the opportunity through the corporate workshop to help identify those things. And I think there's there is a need to be transparent and upfront about the resource constraint issues for local authorities and the public sector generally. Open and honest, I'd say, about that and the challenges it brings in terms of delivery and uncertainties. Openly acknowledge also that communities can be empowered both in plan making and in delivering things, but they do vary in their capacities to do so. They can't be expected to fill all the gaps. So in terms of plan making, for example, you know, we have the opportunity that communities have to do local place plans, as we know, and to build up that as part of the evidence base that they offer up to us. But you know, it's achieving 100% coverage of local place plans is unlikely. So where will that leave us, and how will we fill the gaps in a way that's sufficiently fit for purpose? I think we do, you know, consciously challenge ourselves. We need to continue doing that. How we prepare our plans, and I think I covered that sufficiently before in what I said. Thanks.
Thanks, David. That was great. Maybe Mary, for you, kind of 3, you know, top takeaways so far in terms of your approach.
I think new ways of working and engaging. It's given us more confidence in our approach and thinking, and it's put planning in place higher on the agenda within our own organisation and you know, our local stakeholders more. So really positive outcomes from that.
Great, thanks, Mary. And Naveed, in terms of your involvement with it, kind of, yeah, what have been some of the kind of 3 top takeaways for you in terms of engaging as a key agency?
I think the first one has to be the capacity building and the opportunity that has been both ways. Public Health Scotland, you know, learning from key agency colleagues, and Public Health Scotland passing on the knowledge and resources and the skills that we have to the group. The second is that this work has led to a lot of other work on the back of the relationships that we've established with partners. We are now working with the housing team in the council and supporting them with conducting some health impact assessment on their local housing strategy. We are working with Nature Scotland and Climate Hebrides on some you know, climate change initiatives, and we are working with education on place standard and capacity building, and training some students to be peer-led and peer educators in terms of place standard in the school. So that has led to a lot of substantial pieces of work on the back of this initiative, and I think the other very big one, the third one for us, has been we have now a much better understanding of local context because of being part of this process, and Public Health Scotland being a national agency. You know, sometimes you know, you feel like you are detached from the local context, and you don't have that necessarily really kind of like on the ground understanding of some of the challenges and opportunities that our communities have and face. And this has been really crucial for us to kind of like get in touch with those communities on the ground level.
Brilliant, thanks Naveed. And Dominic, I'm going to go a completely different question to you, but I think it's a question probably people are on the call quite curious about. Have you found, that there's been maybe a specific sort of data set that's maybe helped, or data sets that has had the kind of biggest almost impact in terms of thinking about your kind of plan preparation? I know you mentioned there a lot about kind of that local living, but has there been something that's like really helped, through this process? Say, there's been these sort of data sets that have been really helpful.
Yeah, the one that perhaps has stood out most to me, I mean, it's not actually necessarily a massive data set, but the one that's had probably the biggest impact on me personally and thinking in terms of leading the LDP project is actually data on carbon emissions in Fife, and that trend data, and it really accentuated like so many different sources of carbon emissions were on the way down, but the one that wasn't was transport, and how that relates to, and it joined up with then living more locally and reducing the need to travel, and talking about some of the feedback we've had from the communities as well, in terms of some places are perhaps too built around the car and it's too easy to go somewhere else and things like that, and how we kind of tailor our LDP around that to kind of move towards more living more locally, kind of reducing the need to travel and kind of living more locally. But that one data source in terms of carbon emissions across Fife, in Fife, was kind of instrumental in terms of that. And then it fed into other things in terms of, we did a lot of research into the quality of place, and then that linked into I can understand living more locally and carbon emissions that way, and how it was affecting our town centres in terms of town centre data and how they were performing. But it all perhaps stemmed from that kind of key piece of data in terms of carbon emissions and the impact it was having on Fife.
Brilliant, thanks Dominic. And Grant, have you had a similar one, or are you still trying to maybe make kind of a bit more sense? Have you got a similar kind of story in terms of there's been a data set that's sort of helped contextualise a lot of different things?
It's the one for us. I think it is the data that we're seeking to get from our healthcare colleagues about the capacity issues that they have at the moment, and what the impact of the committed and allocated sites is on what's there already, the stuff that's not yet built, and then what's the impact of any new allocations within the next local development plan. That's really been important for us, finding that information and working with healthcare partners on that, that they continue and are to be really big issues for us and standout issues.
Great, thanks Grant. That's been really good. I've asked you loads of questions, and I know I saw in the chat and the Q&A popping up loads of other questions. So we've probably got about 10 minutes to kind of cover questions, as many questions as we can that have come in from those listening. So I think my colleague Danny has been tracking the chat. If you're there, Danny, and I wonder, have you kind of got any questions that you can kind of direct to any of the panelists, if you're there, Danny? Hi, Danny.
Hi there. So a big variety of things, and I'll try and pull some together. Specific questions, some general questions. So very general things that, and we've tried to answer them as we go along about, basic questions. Some people are not familiar with things like Miro and all that, and some of the technologies we've talked about. So that's all of use. There's been a little bit of a question around, looking at different geographies, so how do you define where these local geographies are? Do you use existing, wards or health areas? There's also been this question around, is there a unified move towards digital space-based evidence? And we've heard a little bit about that. So that's a kind of general question. And then there's been some specific questions, the question around Fife, and some of that has been answered around their evidence reporting in the localities. They've used local health areas and political wards.
Well,
Is
I
there a
wonder maybe
question?
we'll just pause a minute
Sorry.
and just
Yeah,
take
yeah,
maybe
there's
some
quite a
of
few
those
here.
questions. Yeah, no, that's all right. So I suppose in terms of maybe taking the one around geographies, around that sort of, and I know that you're either at a stage where you've looked at what geography you're going to kind of look at your place-based, or you're starting to think about that. And maybe just go round the local authorities that we've got here to kind of, take a view on how you're doing that. So maybe Mary, you sort of raise this as a point, and obviously for you in terms of the Outer Hebrides, it's a different geography in itself than maybe those who have butting up against other local authorities. So I wonder, how have you kind of approached that sort of subset of sort of geographies or places?
Yeah, I mean, this is a topic I think I've covered a wee bit in my commentary today, but it is something we've really grappled with. I think folk think, we're a wholly kind of coterminous island health authority, it should all fit together quite neatly. But in terms of, our population distribution, where our developments are, it doesn't all fit equitably within, our islands or our wards necessarily. Things like SIMD, I think we feel a bit, it doesn't always fit well for big geographies and rural areas because it doesn't necessarily make issues apparent. But really my kind of takeaway or my hint to or giveaway to folk today would really be, don't be tied to historic geographies around wards or particular settlement patterns. Be willing to review it in light of how data is available to you, given the new plan process. We haven't wholly set it on what our geographies are going to be, but we are, I think, tending more towards changing our approach and actually conforming around more like local place, community planning and locality level data.
Great, thanks, Mary. And anybody else want to come in on that? If you've had a look at, David, you want to come in?
Yeah, just briefly, essentially at the moment, we're looking at 3 different levels for information. We're looking at Pan Highland, which I mentioned. We're looking at something at a sub-regional level, and then we're looking at settlement or community level. Now, in terms of, if you like, perhaps the most interesting bit is the middle bit, the sub-regional, and that's being informed at the minute by our early thinking about 20-minute neighbourhoods, one might call it, but let's just badge it local living in a less contentious way, local living for our rural and urban areas of Highland, thinking about catchment areas and so on for that. So I think that's the way we're looking now. That doesn't always directly match up, of course, with how data is gathered. So it's not that everything's going to neatly fall directly into place to a particular geography. There are going to be a few, dare I say it, fudges along the way in how we come up with the story, how we present that evidence. But I think it should be fit for purpose. That's the key thing.
Great, thanks, David. And Danny, in terms of kind of other themes coming forward, you said about digital. Was there questions that were maybe emerging in terms of that?
Yeah, about I suppose emerging data sets and space-based digital evidence. How's that getting used, the mapping of that, building into that. And I think it's coming through in a number of different questions. There's this, how the planner is responding to community action plans and local place plans, and I suppose that level of expectation and equity and how deep's the pot, I suppose, is the question that's related to that. So people are asking about that. How do we match our expectations with the realities of a local expectation that might emerge from that?
That's a really good question. Anybody want to answer that in terms of kind of local place plans, community action plans, how that's being kind of brought in? Nobody wants to. Grant, do you want to?
Yes, what we're in our evidence reports, we're really at this point just submitting and for feeding through the evidence reports what the evidence reports are saying in terms of aspirations and issues within in communities across Midlothian. So we're really at this stage it's evidence that will then inform, that has implications for the proposed plan. So we're not quite at that point. We're just sort of collecting the information to put in to to be part of the evidence reports, which we would then pick up at the proposed plan stage. So at this point, when we were really, as I say, collecting information and putting it in the evidence report, so we're not actually not really got answers to the questions there that are being posted.
If I could come in similarly, so our local place plans, the deadline for them is tied to the start of kind of the proposed plan stage. So we don't know when the gate check's quite going to finish, but we've kind of tied in the deadline for local place plans to fit in at the end of it. So they're not informed our evidence report directly, because we wanted to give communities enough time to actually prepare a local place. But we have engaged with our community councils on the way. It caused a little bit of confusion because they said, well, we're preparing local place plans, why are you asking these questions? But so we have engaged them on the way, but their local place plans themselves, we've kind of, right from the outset, we envisaged they would be informing the proposed plan rather than the evidence report.
Great, thanks, Dominic. I think that's really good. And again, I kind of, just, sharing that kind of lessons learned around that sort of, how to clearly communicate the different, the different aspects of kind of feeding in. Danny, we've probably got time for one more question. I don't know if there's one again that came through as a sort of burning question from the audience.
There are quite a few sort of specific questions I think are probably better dealt with kind of post-event that maybe tie into some of our speakers. There's a nice little one maybe to end on is, how do you consider a place-based approach when the place serves populations in two separate authorities? Now, there wouldn't be too many occasions like that, but there might be places where there's a larger, more, that kind of middle level geography that might be related to. So, but I also think it bears the question of are interconnected places. So that's a little bit of that's come through as a late question, and I think it's quite an interesting little one.
Yeah, I wonder maybe Gran, is that something, obviously Midlothian's kind of relationship with Edinburgh, and how you're kind of thinking about that? Oh, yeah.
Sorry, could you just help me there with the question in terms of the I have to confess I slightly switched off there, which was not good of me, and my apologies. In terms of the relationship between the information that we're collecting and our approach and how it fits with Edinburgh, is that?
Well, I think Danny's question, and maybe Danny's frozen on my screen here, but so I'll need helped out with the actual question. But I think it was where authorities have that relationship across authorities, so that kind of co-location across. So I suppose for you, there's obviously a big, you've got a big relationship, not just with Edinburgh, but with the other, Lothian authorities around about, and how are you kind of factoring that in? It's
coming in through particularly through our transport evidence that we're collecting, and it's got approximately 50% of our residents get their employment out with the local authority area. So that's got implications for local living. It's got implications for the road and the transport network, and community cohesion as well. So we're trying to collect information on those aspects, feed that into the evidence report to try and then pick that up at the proposed plan stage. But it is, it is an issue for us, and increasingly so, arguably, with the population growth in Midlothian primarily being driven by the unaffordability of housing in Edinburgh for many people, and the increased population of people moving out to Midlothian. So that is an issue in terms of reducing the need to travel, supporting our town centres. These are things that we're going to have to pick up through the proposed plan and the next local development plan. I don't know whether that answers the question, but they're the sort of issues, a number of the issues that we're having to grapple with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of reflects that you're considering that and considering the kind of interlink between it. I wonder, maybe Andrew, very quickly, from your perspective, obviously you work across a national remit. So in terms of that kind of bringing in the sort of cross authority aspects, have you got any reflections on that?
Not really, I have to say. We've obviously got contacts for each local development plan, and we have tried to kind of match them up with the regional spatial strategies. So wherever there is a regional spatial strategy that's been brought forward by a number of different local authorities, we've tried to work with that, similar in the way that we used to work with strategic development plans. Yeah, it's not manifest itself as a significant challenge to us at the moment, but that's not to say it wouldn't.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And I think Danny's frozen and he's come back, but as he said, I think what we'll try and do is get as many of the questions that we can that you put in the chat, and in some way try and kind of field them post this session to see if we can answer off any, because the whole idea of this session is about us kind of sharing what we've experienced in terms of the journey so far, but equally there'll be some of those questions that maybe we need to collectively think about together. So really useful, and thanks for everybody. Sorry we didn't get a good amount of time to kind of get through all the questions on the chat for it. I think we're coming very, very close to the end of our time together. I hope you found it really helpful and insightful. We really appreciate your feedback on this session. So if Trevor wants to kind of share the screen, we've created a feedback form because we really want to hear what you liked, what you found useful about today's session, and what things you might have wanted to hear more about. Because that will really help us with future sessions. So we've got a QR code here, and I think Trevor's popped the link in the forms, and I know it's not always easy to find the time to put the feedback in, but we would really appreciate you just taking a few minutes to do that. I suppose in terms of kind of my takeaways, just to kind of sum up what I've kind of taken away from the session. I think we'll do a lot of kind of looking and reflecting back of the session, and more will come out about that. But I think there were some really clear kind of themes coming out that this process, collaborative whole place process, is as much about being a supportive process, and really reaffirming maybe some of the things that have already been done in terms of previous local development plans. It's helping support, kind of reaffirm some of the issues already known, to some of the teams and colleagues. It's about gaining that cross-service working. There's been a better understanding of local context quite early on, for those involved in the process. And I think there's something around, that we're all learning by doing as part of this process. So it's created that kind of really strong framework to be able to kind of support that. So they were my kind of takeaways from the session. But as I said, I think so much has come out of this. We'll get a chance to kind of digest that and share some of the more cohesive kind of learning from this. So it's just to say our work with the pilot authorities obviously is not finished. We're still moving through the different stages of the process. So on the next slide over, if Trevor wants to flick to the next slide, you'll see that we're kind of moving into with some of the authorities in terms of that collective analysis of place-based evidence, and getting more into that actual, a place-based evidence report. So if we flick on to the next couple of slides, just to give you a bit of kind of a flavour of some of the stuff that we're starting to look at, and kind of tools that we're thinking about might be useful in terms of that follow-on, in terms of that analysis. And the next slide over, again, as we've kind of hinted at, the things to use, kind of storyboarding as a way to help collect thoughts and kind of help structure the report. So we hope to have another one of these shared learning events in late summer, which will give a bit more of the story as it emerges. So we'll keep you posted through heads of planning or other channels. So we'd really welcome you to join that again, because we'll be able to kind of share similarly the story a bit further down the line for it. Just in the meantime, as Kate's already alluded to, there's loads of really fantastic resources on Architecture and Design Scotland website. Approaches, templates, we'd love to hear from you if you're using those processes and those templates in your process, and your kind of feedback on those. And also, as we said, the mural boards, you know, get in contact if you want any of the mural boards. We can share what we can share in terms of that. So really, it's just finally for me to have a big thank you to all our panelists. I think you were really, you know, fantastic in terms of kind of sharing some of your insights, and very open and honest in terms of kind of sharing your insights around that. So thank you very much. Thank you to Catherine and Gordon at the start of our session, setting the scene and doing a welcome for us. Big thanks to my team at ANDS. You've seen a few of them on the screen, but there's a few behind the screen, so making this happen and doing all the hard work. And obviously thank you very much to Trevor at the Improvement Service for helping us out and being fantastic in terms of the kind of organising and technology there. So thank you very much everybody for joining us today from across Scotland, and it's just for me to say bye for now. Cheery.